poor young girl was forced to marry a man older than her father. What happened next, no one expected. Texas, 1877. The sun scorched the earth and turned the wind into dry needles that scraped along the worn wooden walls of Dry Creek. It was a town of little mercy, just a saloon, a chapel, a general store with more dust than goods, and the DeWitt Ranch looming at the edge of the horizon like a fortress against time. Inside the parlor of the ranch house, the air was stale with silence. Maybelle Quinn stood in a tattered white dress that had once belonged to her mother. The lace was yellowed, the hem was frayed. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but fury. Her father stood beside her, reeking of whiskey and cheap tobacco, his calloused hand resting on the hilt of his belt. "You look fine enough," he grunted, giving her a nudge toward the doorway. "Do not embarrass me." Maybelle's jaw tightened. She did not look at him. Instead, her eyes locked on the door ahead, where beyond it, a man older than her father waited to claim her. Outside, a modest crowd had gathered. Dust clung to boots, bonnets, and beards. Ranch hands, townsfolk, and curious drifters all watched as the bride stepped forward onto the wooden platform that creaked beneath her bare feet in borrowed shoes. Warren DeWitt stood tall at the end of the aisle. He wore a black coat, simple and clean, with his wide-brimmed hat in hand. His face was unreadable, carved by sun and silence. At 42, he was the most powerful man for miles. His cattle fed the town, his water kept it alive, but he carried himself not like a king, but a man burdened by ghosts. The preacher raised his Bible. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." The words blurred. Maybelle heard nothing but the thrum of blood in her ears. Her heart pounded like a war drum. She stared at Warren. He did not look cruel, but he did not smile either. Then the preacher turned to her. "Do you, Maybelle Quinn, take this man?" A sudden clang of metal on wood. Gasps rose from the crowd. Maybelle had pulled a knife from the folds of her dress and slammed it into the table before her. The blade stuck, quivering. "I ain't no horse to be traded for a stack of debts," she said, voice sharp and shaking. "I will not be bartered like cattle. I ain't a coin in a drunk man's pocket." The preacher froze, hand still mid-air. Maybelle's father took a step forward, red with rage. "You little—" Warren raised a hand. "Let her speak." All eyes turned to him. He stepped forward slowly, placed his hat on the table beside the trembling knife, and looked straight into Maybelle's eyes. "I do not want you to be my wife because you owe me," he said, calm and measured. "I want you to stay because you choose to." Silence fell like ash over the gathering. Even the wind seemed to hush. Maybelle blinked, her throat tightened, her hand, still clenched, loosened slightly. She stared at the man before her. Not a tyrant, not a savior, just a man who had offered something she had never been given. A choice. The preacher cleared his throat. No one dared speak as the ceremony resumed. The vows were said, the rings exchanged, but something had changed. A fire had been lit. By sundown, they were husband and wife. By morning, the whole town was talking. DeWitt Ranch, 3 days after the wedding. The wind screamed across the plains like something wounded, and inside the house built of stone and cedar, silence ruled heavier than any storm. Maybelle had locked the bedroom door from the moment they arrived. She had not unpacked her trunk, she had not eaten supper with him. She spoke only when necessary. Short, sharp words like blades thrown at the floor. She'd broken a vase the first night, slammed the door so hard it shook dust from the rafters. Still, Warren said nothing. He gave her space. In the mornings, she woke to find a book resting gently against her door. Always a different one. The first was Jane Eyre, the second, The Awakening, the third, Little Women. All of them were about women. Fierce, complicated, bold. Women who fought for their voices in a world that never asked what they wanted. She did not open them at first. She kicked them aside. But by the fourth morning, she paused. The book was The Story of a Pioneer. It had a note tucked into the first page. "You do not have to like me, but I hope you keep reading. W.D." She read the first 10 pages before sundown. They did not speak much. At night, she heard him walk past her door, the floorboards creaking once, twice, then falling still. She listened as he made coffee at dawn, as he cleaned his boots in the mudroom, as he murmured quietly to his horse out in the barn. He never tried to open her door, never raised his voice, never demanded. He simply existed, like the ranch itself. Stoic, weathered, vast. On the 6th night, Maybelle could not sleep. The prairie wind howled outside, slipping through the cracks in the window like cold fingers. She pulled the blanket tighter, but her mind raced. She was a wife now, in name, on paper, but inside she still felt like a prisoner. Then she heard something, a soft strum, low and slow, the unmistakable sound of guitar. She rose, barefoot, and crept down the hall. Her fingers brushed the log walls for balance. The living room glowed faintly from the fire. Warren sat in a chair by the hearth, a weathered guitar in his lap. He did not see her. He was lost in the music, his eyes half closed, face soft, almost gentle. The tune was melancholy but strangely tender. It spoke of something old, something broken, something still holding on. Maybelle froze in the shadows. The man who had bought her freedom with a marriage contract was playing music like a boy in love with the moon. The melody shifted, rising like wind through the canyon. And then it stopped, abrupt. He exhaled, as if returning from somewhere far. Maybelle retreated to her room before he noticed her. Heart quickened. She closed the door behind her, leaned against it, and stared into the dark. She had not known Warren DeWitt could play music. She had not known men like him could bleed in silence. That night, she opened the book and read until morning. The morning sky was the color of tarnished silver, clouds hanging low like secrets not yet spoken. The air was crisp, cooler than most Texas mornings, and the world outside the ranch felt strangely quiet. Maybelle sat on the front steps, a mug of coffee growing cold in her hands. She watched the sun begin to rise behind the hills, casting long shadows across the fence posts. Warren approached from the stables, his steps steady, his voice low. "I am going to ride out to check the creek line," he said, nodding toward the horses. "You are welcome to come if you like." She looked at him, uncertain. Part of her wanted to refuse out of habit. The other part, it was quieter now, since the night she heard him play guitar, leaned in. After a pause, she rose. "I will need a gentler horse than that red devil of yours," she said flatly. Warren's lips twitched at the corners, just barely, saddles already waiting. They rode in silence for the first stretch, the only sound being the soft clop of hooves and the occasional rustle of jackrabbits darting through sagebrush. Maybelle had not ridden this far from the ranch since the wedding. The air smelled of dry grass and river wind. It stirred something she had nearly forgotten. Freedom. Warren led her through a narrow pass and up a sloping hill. At the top, the land opened wide. From there, she could see miles in every direction. Burnt orange ridges, scattered oaks, the blue shimmer of a distant creek. But what caught her attention was the split in the trail ahead. 2 roads, one bent left, curling through the hills back toward the ranch. The other veered right, vanishing into the open plain. Warren stopped his horse at the fork and dismounted. He brushed dust from his hat and spoke without turning around. "That road on the left will take you back home. It is familiar, quiet, mine." He pointed toward the right. "That one leads straight into Dry Creek. You can reach the station by sundown if you ride hard." She frowned, confused. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I meant what I said, Maybelle. I do not want you to stay because your father owed me, or because the town expects it. I want you to stay if it is something you choose." Her horse shifted beneath her. She looked between the 2 paths, then at Warren. "You brought me all the way out here just to let me go?" "I did." He took a few steps forward, turning his back to her. "I will not follow. Whichever way you turn, you will ride it alone. The wind picked up. Her heart thudded. The idea of freedom, true freedom, was right there, like a song on the edge of her lips. She stared at the road to Dry Creek. The open horizon beckoned, wild and wide. But then she looked back at the man standing still, shoulders squared, facing away from her. A man who had offered her silence instead of shouting, space instead of chains, books instead of threats. A man who had waited, without question, for her to decide. Maybelle tightened her grip on the reins. Slowly, purposefully, she turned her horse toward the left path. Warren heard the hooves shifting. He turned just enough to meet her eyes. She said nothing. He said nothing back. But something passed between them, a quiet understanding, a thread beginning to weave. They rode back in silence, but the space between them no longer felt like a wall. It felt like a beginning. The letter came folded twice, its edges smudged with dirt and sweat. It was slipped under Maybelle's door before dawn, delivered by a boy too afraid to knock. When she opened it, her fingers trembled. "Pa's drinkin' again. Says he's gonna give Lisa to that horse trader from El Paso. Says the man'll pay in 2 barrels of whiskey and a mare. Please, Belle, do something. Sadie." Maybelle dropped the letter. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Liza, her little sister. Only 14. Just a child. She did not put on her shoes. She did not brush her hair. She ran barefoot through the hallway, down the stairs, and burst into the barn where Warren was feeding the horses. "Warren," she gasped. He turned quickly, startled by her face. White as linen, lips trembling. "He's selling her," she whispered, clutching the letter. "He's giving Liza away for 2 barrels and a damn horse." Warren's jaw tensed. "Your father?" She nodded, breath catching. "Please, I know you do not owe me anything. But I cannot let him do this. I cannot let her live what we." She choked. He stepped forward slowly, not touching her, just standing close. "Do you believe," he asked quietly, "that I would ever harm you?" She looked up, eyes wet and raw. "I do not know how to believe that," she said. "Not anymore." Warren looked away for a moment, then reached for his coat. "Saddle up." They rode hard. By midday, they reached Dry Creek. The streets buzzed with heat and voices. Word had already traveled. Quinn was trading his youngest girl for liquor and a roan mare. The townspeople gawked as Maybelle and Warren strode up the main road. Her father was outside the saloon, laughing with the horse trader, a heavy man with stained teeth and a cigar. Maybelle leapt off her horse. "You will not touch her," she shouted. "She is a child." Her father turned, blinking in surprise. "Well, well, look what the wind blew back. She is not yours to sell. I fed her, clothed her, raised her. I can do what I please with what's mine." Warren dismounted and stepped between them. The crowd began to gather, men leaning against posts, women peering from porches. "Liza is not livestock," Warren said, voice like gravel and thunder. "She is a girl, a sister, and she will not be bartered." Quinn sneered. "And what are you then? A savior? Do not forget, you paid for her sister with land and cattle." Maybelle froze. Warren did not flinch. "I bought a chance for her to choose," he said, "and I waited for her to choose me. That is the difference." A long silence. Someone in the crowd muttered, "That true, Miss Maybelle." She looked at them. All the faces. She had never been more exposed in her life. And yet, "Yes," she said, voice steady. "He gave me what no one else ever did, a way out, and the right to say no." The horse trader stepped back, muttering something about not wanting trouble, and slipped away down the road. Quinn's face turned a dangerous red. "You ungrateful little—" Warren stepped closer. "You come near either of them again," he said, voice low and unshakable, "and I will make sure there is not a soul left in this town who will deal with you." The crowd murmured. No one stood with Quinn, not anymore. He spat on the ground, then stumbled into the saloon. Maybelle exhaled, her knees weak. Warren turned to her. "You all right?" She nodded, Then, for the first time since their wedding, she reached out and touched his hand. "Thank you," she whispered. Around them, something shifted, and Dry Creek began to see Warren DeWitt not as the man who bought a bride, but the man who returned a girl her voice. The trail home was quiet, draped in the fading gold of late afternoon. The horses moved slowly now, their pace unhurried, as if sensing the tension between their riders had changed. The urgency of the day had burned off with the heat, leaving behind only dust, long shadows, and thoughts that stretched like fence wire across the heart. Maybelle stole a glance at Warren as they rode. His frame sat tall in the saddle, but there was a weight to his posture, one that had nothing to do with age or exertion. It was the weight of something carried too long, too deep. When they reached a bend in the trail overlooking a dry creek bed, Warren pulled his horse to a stop. The sun dipped lower, turning the sky above them into a wash of rust and honey. "We will rest here a moment," he said, his voice rough from wind and weariness. He dismounted stiffly, his boots hitting the ground with the sound of finality. Maybelle followed, swinging one leg over and sliding to the ground. Her legs ached, but her mind was far from tired. She found a flat stone and brushed her skirt aside as she sat, the fabric still warm from the Sunday. Warren stood nearby, hands resting on his belt, gaze fixed on the distant line of trees that marked the edge of someone else's land. "I was not always this way," he said, voice low. Quiet, guarded. Maybelle glanced at him but did not interrupt. "I was married once, you should know that." Her head turned fully now, her brow furrowed. He still would not meet her eyes. "Her name was Clara. She was 16. I was 30. It was arranged. Two old men deciding what a union was worth. She never said no, but she never smiled either." He paused. "She painted birds, everywhere, on the pantry door, on the windowsills, on the side of the chicken coop, even. She tried to bring life to that place. I thought I was being good to her. I gave her land, clothes, security." He gave a short, bitter laugh. "But I never asked her what she wanted, not once." Maybelle felt her chest pull tight. "One winter," he continued, "I came home late from a supply run. It had snowed hard, quieting everything. Too quiet. I found her in the snow behind the barn. She had drunk a bottle of laudanum. She was still wearing the scarf I gave her for Christmas." His voice cracked. His eyes, when they finally lifted to meet hers, were no longer stone. They were shattered glass. "I buried her myself. Dug the grave with my own hands. No preacher, no guests, no one came. I told myself I would never marry again, not unless the woman could walk in freely and walk out the same." He sat down heavily on a nearby log, his shoulders slack, elbows resting on his knees, eyes cast downward. "I did not kill her, but I caged her with my good intentions, and the cage did the rest." Maybelle sat quietly, hands in her lap, heart aching. The wind whispered through the grass, brushing her cheeks like fingers she could not see. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small handkerchief, aged cotton, faded pink stitching in the corner. Her mother's, one of the few things she had taken when she left home. Without a word, she rose, crossed the space between them, and knelt down beside him. She placed the handkerchief in his palm. Warren looked at it, then at her. He said nothing. Neither did she. They sat there as the sky turned from gold to violet, and the hush of dusk settled like a quilt around them. And in that silence, something old, something broken, began, quietly, to heal. The night was moonless, but Maybelle's resolve burned like wildfire. She stood in front of the cracked mirror in the back of the ranch house, binding her hair beneath a tattered scarf. Her dress was plain, dirty by design. She smeared ash across her cheeks, dulling the glow of her skin, masking the shape of a woman born for better things. In her satchel, a tin of kerosene, matches, and a stolen kitchen knife. She would not wait for Warren this time. She would not ask him to fight her battles. Tonight, she was going to face her father herself. The saloon in Dry Creek was rowdy by midnight, thick with cigar smoke and cheap whiskey. Music played from a broken piano, and laughter spilled out onto the street. Upstairs, the song Bach, illegal but well known, roared behind a locked door. Maybelle slipped in through the back, walking with a limp to disguise her step. No one looked twice. Another girl looking for coin, another shadow in a house full of ghosts. Inside, men threw dice and passed money between calloused fingers. Her father's voice rang out from the far end, drunk and loud, barking at Liza to fetch another bottle. Her little sister, pale, trembling, no longer a child. Maybelle clenched her fists. She made her way to the back room where the ledgers were kept, where the debts were written and lives were ruined. She slipped inside when no one watched. The book was there, thick, stained, filled with names and numbers. Her father's signature littered the pages like rot. She poured the kerosene slowly, every corner, every page, and then struck a match. The fire whooshed to life like it had been waiting. A shout rang out behind her. "What the hell?" Men stormed in. Maybelle tried to run, but one grabbed her wrist. She twisted, kicked, screamed. But they dragged her into the main room, fire licking behind them. "Thief!" someone yelled. "Spy!" Her father shoved through the crowd, red-faced. "You again? You just don't learn, girl." He raised a hand to strike her. But he never got the chance, because the front doors burst open and Warren DeWitt stepped inside. He did not yell. He did not draw a gun. He simply walked forward, slow, steady, like the law of the earth itself. He looked at her father, then at every man in the room. "If you were men," he said calmly, "you would not let a child be sold like cattle. You would not let a girl risk her life to undo what you built in shame." No one spoke. "You want to call yourselves men?" he continued. "Then act like it." The silence deepened. Even the piano player stopped mid-note. Her father lowered his arm, jaw trembling. One by one, the others stepped back. Warren reached for Maybelle. She took his hand. Liza ran to her, crying. They left the saloon in silence, the fire behind them dying into smoke. At the ranch, Maybelle stood on the porch in the starlight. She had washed away the ash and tears, but not the truth. She turned to Warren. "I was angry," she said. "Angry that you bought me, even with good reasons. Angry that I felt safe when I did not want to." He said nothing, only watched her with that calm, patient strength she was beginning to trust. She stepped closer. "But tonight," she whispered, "I stood on my own, and when I did, I knew who I wanted to stand beside me." She reached up, touched his face, and kissed him. Soft, certain, free. Then she pulled back and looked him in the eye. "I choose you, not because I have to, because I want to." And under the stars of Texas, for the first time, they smiled together. The days that followed settled into a rhythm as natural as the wind sweeping across the plains. Gone were the locked doors and cold silences. Maybelle no longer avoided the house or the man who lived in it. She rose before the sun, pulled on her boots with laces frayed from use, and made her way to the barn, where the smell of hay and horses replaced the weight that once sat in her chest each morning. She learned quickly. She shoveled stalls without complaint, hauled feed with her sleeves rolled up, and even helped birth a stubborn calf during a surprise cold snap. The ranch hands, grizzled men with calloused fingers and wary eyes, watched her at first with suspicion, but by the end of the first week, they began to nod at her in quiet approval. One even tipped his hat. She didn't need their praise, but she took it like warmth on her skin. Soon, she began carrying a small ledger in her apron pocket. She tracked expenses, feed schedules, and grazing rotations. Warren never asked her to. He simply noticed one evening that the numbers on the kitchen table were cleaner, tighter, easier to read. He said nothing. But the next morning, a new fountain pen appeared beside her plate. By dusk, she and Warren would sit on the porch, sometimes reading aloud, sometimes in companionable quiet. He carved small wooden animals with a knife she hadn't seen him use before. She read everything from philosophy to plant science. She even started leaving books on his chair when he forgot to bring one out. The silence had changed. It no longer echoed with fear or resistance. It felt chosen, shared. That particular evening, the air hung thick with the scent of sage and sunburned earth. Fireflies blinked lazily in the tall grass, and the distant chirp of crickets softened the sky's deepening blue. Maybelle sat cross-legged on the porch swing, a worn copy of Walden in her lap. Her fingers toyed with the fraying corners of the cover. Warren sat nearby, sharpening a blade with rhythmic care. The rasp of stone on steel filled the spaces between them. She closed the book gently and looked over. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Warren gave a small nod without pausing. "That day, up on the ridge, when you told me I could ride into Dry Creek if I had chosen the other road, what would you have done?" His hand stilled. "I would have let you go." She tilted her head slightly. "And after?" He set the blade aside and turned toward her, his face unreadable for a moment. Then, softer, more certain. "I would have kept living, fed the stock, rode the fences, repaired the gate like I planned to." A pause. "But?" He looked at her then, truly looked, his eyes steady in the fading light. "But I would not have waited on the porch anymore." Maybelle swallowed, her throat tightening with emotion she hadn't prepared for. "No one has ever waited for me," she whispered. "I would have," he said, "even if I had to do it from a distance." She looked down at her hands, no longer soft, no longer uncertain. They were steady now, strong, capable. And then she felt his. Warren reached across the space between them and took her hand. Slowly, deliberately. His grip was warm and rough with the years, but it held no weight, no claim. It was not a gesture of rescue, it was a vow. He held her hand like a man holds the hand of the woman he loves. Not because she needs him, but because she chooses to be there. Maybelle leaned her head against his shoulder, letting the swing move with the rhythm of the wind and the breath between them. The drought still gripped the land. The fences still needed mending, but in that quiet, unspoken moment, there was water. And it was enough. Spring came slow to the Texas plains, but it came. The frost gave way to soft earth, and the winds that once screamed through the valley now hummed like lullabies. Green returned in cautious brushstrokes. Buds on mesquite trees, little weeds poking through cracks in dry stone, and the promise of new life where the land had once only known dust. At the far edge of DeWitt Ranch, nestled between two hills, a small house stood unfinished, its walls still smelling of fresh-cut wood and hope. It was smaller than the main house, but brighter, with wide windows and a wraparound porch. Maybelle stood barefoot on the steps, holding a rolled parchment under her arm. "I still cannot believe you drew this," Warren said from beside her, hammer in hand. "I cannot believe you built it exactly as I imagined," she replied. He chuckled softly. "Was not much of a leap. You wanted light, space, and a door that only opens from the inside." She smiled. Exactly. The floor plan had been hers. Every corner and beam, every window and cupboard. A place not given, but created. A home not inherited, but earned. That morning, they planted a rose bush just beneath the porch window, its roots tangled with soil warmed by morning Sunday. Warren knelt, his hands in dirt, while Maybelle gently placed the small shrub into the hole. Pink blossoms curled at the tips, still sleepy from the cold. "Why roses?" he asked. "They fight," she answered. "They bloom in spite of thorns." He nodded, as if that explained everything. As they finished patting down the soil, a horse came up the road with a letter in hand. Maybelle recognized the handwriting before she even opened it. "Lisa." She read it aloud on the porch steps, her voice catching in places. "Dear Belle, the nuns say I can stay until I am grown, and then they will help me find a place to teach. I think I want to be like the woman in your books. But most of all, I want to be like you. You showed me that no one gets to write my story for me. Not Papa, not poverty, not fear. Only me. I love you. Liza. Tears welled in Maybelle's eyes, but she smiled through them. Later that week, the town of Dry Creek gathered again, this time at the little white chapel down the road, where wildflowers spilled through the windows and songbirds danced in the rafters. There was no contract this time, no debts owed, no whispers of scandal. Just laughter. Just joy. Just a man and a woman walking side by side, hands linked, eyes steady. Maybelle wore no veil, only a simple dress and a sprig of rosemary in her hair. Warren wore the same black coat from before, but this time his face was not unreadable. It was full of light. The preacher spoke, but this time Maybelle heard every word. When it came time for her vows, she turned to Warren and held both his hands. "I used to think I was just something passed between men," she said. "A weight, a burden, a trade.